Today I'm going to discuss my lesson plan for a Mayflower Compact inquiry lesson. So the objectives of my lesson today are for the class to fill out a KWL chart, accessing prior knowledge and thinking about what they want to know. And then they're going to write W questions, so who, what, when, where, why, or how. And then we're going to be talking about thick or thin questions so that they ultimately can choose a research question for their project. So the first things first, I would welcome them at the door. Welcome to my class. Please sit down four at a table, no more than four. You'll find worksheets in the center. Don't touch them yet. You will get instructions on that in a minute. So first class, what have you been learning in your classroom? Hopefully the kids will talk about the Mayflower Compact because the teacher has already started talking about it. Okay, so today we're going to be starting our research process. And the very first step to a research process is to get a good, solid question. So today we're going to work on formulating a great question for you to research about that you're going to be curious about. And it's going to give you a good project. But first things first, I want you to grab your pencils, and I want you to grab one of the worksheets in the center. And you'll see at the top of the worksheet is a KWL chart. So if you don't remember, for a KWL chart, you're going to first fill in the first column, and that is what you have already learned. So you can all easily fill in what your teacher has already taught you about the Mayflower Compact. The next thing you're going to do is fill in the next column with things that you're curious about. So anything you want to know about the Mayflower Compact will go in that column. So take a few minutes and do that. I'll wait a few minutes. Okay, great, guys. So now I want some people to share what they're curious about. So I'll call on one per table and to share what they're curious about, and we'll make it into a W question. So for example, if what somebody wanted to know was the date of the Mayflower Compact, I would ask them, how would you frame that question? Would you say who, what, when, where, why, or how? So then they'll start to get their W questions. From there, after we've practiced on a few tables, I will have them individually write their W questions out on their worksheet. On the bottom of the worksheet is going to be who, what, when, where, why, and how. They can do 5 or 6. They can choose between why and how. So go ahead and do that, class. So they'll do that. Then I will gather them up. Okay, now you guys all have 5 or 6 really great possible research questions. But now we have to decide which ones are going to be good for our research and which ones won't give you a very solid answer. So we call these two different types of questions thick or thin questions. So on the board behind me, I don't actually have it, but is a T graph with thick on one side and thin on the other. So I'm going to ask some of you to share your questions, and we're going to categorize them as thick or thin. Now a thick question gives you a nice lengthy response. So things like, how do you ride a bike? You would have a lengthy response to talk about that. Or, let's see, what do you love about summer? Those would give you something that you can really talk about, really emphasize on. And then thin questions, on the other hand, could just be one word. So like, when is your birthday? Would just be a one word or a couple word answer. We don't want a thin question for our research, we want a thick question. So together we're going to work this out, and we're going to figure out what some of our questions are, whether they're thick or they're thin. So I would call on some examples. So for that one student who wanted to know when the Mayflower Compact was, I would ask them, is that a thick question? Can we get a really lengthy response? Or is that a thin question where there would just be a couple of words? And we'd go through a few examples of that. Great. So now, class, now that you have your W questions and we've talked about thick and thin questions, I'm going to have you work individually and decide which of your questions is a really good thick question. Now, even though I say individually, I don't mean that you have to be silent. If you need help or if you want to check with your partners at your tables, that is great. Please talk about which ones would be best for your research. Take a few minutes and decide which thick question you want to use. So the class would take a few minutes to do that. They would talk, I would walk around, check and see if they're getting it. then we would come together, and as a final assessment of the class, I would ask, okay, great, how do we know if we have a thick question? Class would answer. Now that we have our thick question, what do we think our next step is going to be in the research process? Once again, kids would have different answers, but ultimately, research would be next, and I would say, yeah, great, so next time we meet here, we're going to be working on the next step of our research process. Thank you very much.